So let's get started. Thank you, as always, for those of you who are joining us. For those of you who may not know me, my bad if you don't, but I'm Linda Bent. I am one of the owners of Pique Travel. My husband, Jim, is also on. If you see another Linda Bent on here, that's because that's him. So we are the owners of Pique Travel here in Excelsior. We know many of you, and for those of you who are new to us, welcome. It's been a little while since we've done a travel night, so I'm super excited to be back, if you will. And it's good to see familiar faces as always. And it's fun for me tonight because, well, I shouldn't say it's fun, because I would rather be talking solely about a destination that we're inspiring you to travel about. There's a little hidden of that in here tonight, but this topic came really directly requested by you guys. From the last newsletter we sent out, a few of you asked and emailed and said, hey, could somebody update us on COVID and traveling, and is it okay to get back out there, and what do I need to know, and stuff like that. So, and then of course, several of you guys sent in questions ahead of time, which has all hopefully been, many of them have been incorporated into tonight's presentation. So it should be speaking directly to you tonight. And I really do want to encourage you, just as a little bit of a Zoom refresher, to use the chat. And if you can do the drop down to everyone so everybody can see what people are saying, so we can get some banter going and comments to each other. And then Erin will help me, Erin Green on my team, many of you know her. She will help monitor them. And then at the end, we'll come back to them and address whatever we don't address, or comments that you want to throw in on top of what I'm talking about. And then of course, if you don't have your view, usually if you hover in the upper right, usually there's a speaker view, then you should be able to see at least my video, my face, and the presentation. If any of these are not working, we're recording this, so you'll be able to watch it later, but listen in now and stuff, but hopefully you'll be able to see the screens as well. So let's talk about tonight's topic. It is, of course, the somewhat dreaded COVID, but I think we're kind of getting a little used to this, if that's possible, but more so tonight, of course, talking about navigating during these times of COVID. So we're going to address a lot of topics, a few of which I've put up here, but are people traveling? Can you travel? We're going to talk a lot about some of the requirements we're seeing from a vaccination and testing. What if you get sick? How do you protect yourself? And a lot of these kinds of things. Okay, of course, I'm getting texts that they can't get into the Zoom, but hopefully they got my email. So these are some of the things we're going to address, and then of course lots of time for Q&A at the end, because it would be amazing for you guys to just jump in on some of what we're chatting about. So, are people traveling? The short answer is yes, and we are feeling it. And I swear, I told Jim during COVID that I will never complain about being busy again. And for those of you who know me, you know I like to be busy. Well, COVID was a different kind of busy, and that's not healthy or cool. So we are busy. You can ask anyone on our team. We are busy. And so where are people going? They're going a lot of places, and a lot of different places. A lot of Europe, Greece, Croatia, you can see on the screen. A lot of Italy, Spain, Portugal. We have a bunch of Ireland for this summer. We have some Switzerland. A lot of just a range of places in Europe. Upper left, Tahiti has been a little hotbed for us, so that's been kind of nice. Some honeymoons or anniversary escapes. Africa, of course, in the middle is starting to get busy again for us. So if you don't know Chris Nosworthy and you want to go to Africa, you're going to get to know him well. He is our Africa specialist, so we are having a lot of drumming up now of people looking to this year and into next for Africa. And then of course, lower left, Alaska, Iceland, some of those destinations that have that kind of shorter window for this summer, really busy for this summer. So if you want to go to some of those short window season places, please let's chat. But yes, they are traveling. And in fact, it's very fun. We just got some photos today of a client who is in Uganda gorilla trekking. And it's a little blurry, but this is one of his photos. This mom, you can see her babies and some of the troop there in the background, um, literally came up to him. He's been texting with Chris and came up and tugged on his arm a couple times and stuff like that. So these were literally sent to us yesterday and today. He's been communicating. Trip of a lifetime. And for those people who are traveling right now and into this year, we're hearing such amazing reports, and many of our team has been traveling too, which has been really, really fun, because it's still on the upper climb of getting back into travel. So the crowds are a little less, the restaurants are a little less busy. And, we'll talk about if travel is right for you right now. We want to respect that. But if it is, it can be a really magical time right now to be going places. Okay, so should I travel? Well, of course, as you can imagine, I'm not going to tell you you should travel. As much as I would love you to travel, it is such a personal decision. And if you've been with us since the beginning of our travel nights during COVID, we can't emphasize this enough. We're not here to sell you travel. We are here to help guide you and to collaborate. And if it is right for you, then amazing, then great. But I'm not going to convince you. I don't know your health situation. I'm not going to ask you, other than I might ask you if you're vaccinated. I'm not going to ask you your health situation. And I'm not trying to convince you to get out there if it's not the right time for you. However, can you? Absolutely. If you are vaccinated and you're open to a little testing along the way, there's no reason you can't travel. If all else checks out and you're in a good place and there's no craziness going on with health or anything else that you would be uncomfortable about, there's no reason. Just know that it is evolving though, however, of course, and we're going to talk about places that you can or cannot go, but places that used to be not requiring a vaccination, Mexico, Costa Rica, some of those kind of places, it's kind of getting a little tricky because, like Costa Rica right now, the country itself is not saying you have to be vaccinated. But if you're going to be in a hotel, which many of us would be, we want to go out to the local restaurants. We maybe want to do an indoor concert or an indoor something. They are requiring vaccinations. So in the end, you're going to hear me talk a lot about tonight. Please advise with your travel designer, because as you could imagine, we are getting quite versed in COVID. We are getting quite versed in protocols and testing and vaccines and things. We don't want you to solely rely on us. And you're going to hear me say this a lot tonight too. It needs to be collaborative because things, as you know, if you're watching anything of the news, it's changing all the time. And we are sending people all over the world and every country is different. So we need to collaborate, but we want you to be able to enjoy those destinations. So even though Costa Rica says you don't have to be vaccinated, if you have to be vaccinated to eat in any of the local restaurants or go to a hotel, then you probably shouldn't go right now if you're not vaccinated, because you're not going to experience that destination the way you should or the way you deserve. So we're going to get more detail on vaccination and testing requirements in a little bit, but I do want to address, what if you're not vaccinated or you're traveling with children who aren't vaccinated, or others? We've had multi-gen families or cousins or whatever, and some of them are not vaccinated. What do you do? Well, the easy answer actually is to maybe consider traveling domestically. You don't have to be vaccinated to travel between the states as of right now, of course. And, that also means, don't forget Hawaii, don't forget the US Virgin Islands. You may have to test to get in or do certain things in those areas, but you may not have to be vaccinated. So again, discussion points with your travel advisor and designer are kind of key right now. But domestic is the easiest answer. And there's plenty of places here at home that we realized during 2020, road trips and stuff were so popular that let's not forget some of the beauty we have close by. But right now, if you are not vaccinated, we do not recommend traveling internationally because frankly, most places aren't going to let you in. And secondly, if they do, they're going to require a quarantine, which kind of defeats the purpose, because who wants to sit in their hotel room, which I literally mean you'd have to sit in your hotel room. This is no hanging out at the pool kind of thing. So just know that if you're not vaccinated, then maybe international travel is not quite for you. And just know that the requirements are changing all the time and on case by case basis, destination by destination. So we have several resources that we use constantly that we will share with you and encourage you to also collaborate with us on it. So what are some of those resources? We rely heavily on, of course, we follow the CDC. Anything regarding the medical, the health, the vaccine, things like that, we defer, of course, to them. We view them as the experts. We are not doctors. We look to them for that. From a travel perspective, we go to two places. And I will say the first one, which is the tourism authorities or the tourist boards, is probably our favorite. And so Belize is an example. It is in their best interest to keep that information updated, right? They want people to come. US travelers in particularly are known around the globe as being maybe some of the higher ticket spenders or stay longer or whatever. They want us to come. So it is in their interest to keep that information updated. We use the tourism authority websites multiple times a day. We also will consult with the US embassies in those, and they all have websites, of course. This is an example for Greece. So they always talk about if you're coming from the United States, if you're vaccinated, if you're not vaccinated, and it's just a bullet point, pretty easy to follow. So I would suggest that if you're contemplating a destination or you're trying to learn a little bit more about the protocols, consider any or all of these sources, as well as we, of course, will share our knowledge and help keep up on it as well. So, do you need to be vaccinated to travel? We talked about it a little, but let me clarify before we get too far into the rest of the Q&A. We are going to do a deep dive right now on vaccinations and testing, because those are the two top things that we must talk about for every trip. Like I said, we would normally not ask you about your health, but we have to know if you're vaccinated, because it could deter a conversation. It might mold a conversation. It might weed places in or out. So just know that we're not trying to be nosy. We're trying to be good advisors. So, and also, to be very clear about vaccination, this is also a personal decision. We are not here to express an opinion onto you. We respect some people's choice to not get vaccinated. And if you don't want to, that we're not here to convince you otherwise. However, we happen to be providing a professional service that somewhat relies on our clients to be vaccinated. So we ask it, we encourage it if you are an international traveler and all else is equal. But if you aren't getting vaccinated and you don't want to travel internationally, then no love lost. Who cares? Stay domestic, enjoy our places here, and it's all great. So tonight is going to be a little bit more focused on if you are vaccinated because you want to travel more internationally. So we're going to talk about a lot of topics around that. And if you do, clearly a vaccine should be in your future or already in your arm. So just know that it could be the difference between on the left, the coast of California, or on the right, the coast of the Amalfi Coast of Italy. Your call, will help either way. And by the way, I am intentionally giving you some subliminal inspirational photography tonight, because who wants to look at syringes and testing swabs? So on my vaccination and testing slides, I'm putting pretty pictures because that's what we should be looking at. So speaking of pretty pictures, how long are vaccinations valid? So let me define valid before. I'm really in this context, again, talking about as it relates to travel, right? So the age of the vaccine is becoming a thing. In other words, many places around the globe want to see a recent vaccination. So in terms of if they're valid, we're talking about travel, not from a doctor standpoint, not making medical claims or whatever, but what to go to Croatia, to go to Costa Rica, to go to some of these places. What are they saying? They require a vaccination. What does that mean? So let me give you a couple examples. First, on the left, a perfect picture of the road to Hana for those of you who might recognize or have driven those switchbacks. Beautiful. Because my first example is Maui County in Hawaii. And their proof of vaccination right now is being within 6 months of your last shot. And that is in order to enter restaurants and some of the indoor gathering places. So again, you don't have to necessarily be vaccinated to get to Hawaii, but we're starting to see some of these changes on indoor places and gathering, and when crowds are together, they want to see vaccination. In many cases, 6 months, for example, that probably means a booster, because if you were on the forefront or on the early adopter of getting the vaccine, that might have been last April, May, March, depending. And that means a booster now would make you qualify. Now, in this case for Hawaii, you can test within 48 hours if you don't meet that qualification. So it doesn't mean you can't go to Hawaii. It doesn't mean you can't go into a hotel. Just know that if you're going to do a special dinner out and your booster, you haven't gotten boosted yet, and your vaccine is older than 6 months, there are a lot of stipulations where you can do a test within a certain period of time, and that can count too. So know that there's a lot of nuances, and that's what we're here to help guide you on. Another example, Costa Rica. Again, I mentioned, while the country itself isn't requiring a vaccine yet, the hotels, the restaurants, the concert venues, they are. So we're getting a little bit against private sector versus government and stuff like that. But if you can't go to a hotel and a restaurant, like I said, then it'd be hard pressed for us to recommend you go to Costa Rica if you're not vaccinated, because you wouldn't be able to get into a lot of those things. Again, we watch for the testing qualifications as well, but clearly that vaccination card is kind of your golden ticket, right? And then in Croatia, my last example, which is on the right, Dubrovnik, of course, the iconic coastline of the Adriatic Sea, a certificate of vaccination means that your either single dose like J&J, or your second double dose, or your booster was at least 14 days ago, but not older than 365. So again, we're coming up on a year here where people have had their first or second shots. These are the things we're watching for. So just so you know, as you're brainstorming destinations, these are the things we're looking for and why we ask you some of the questions we ask you. I hope that makes sense. Okay, next question. When do I test? Oh, let's move on to testing. There's so much good stuff to talk about. So many questions about testing. And honestly, some of the answers are still quite nebulous. The biggest question is, how far in advance do I have to test, right? So when do I test? And it does, again, just like most answers that we're going to give you, is it depends on destination and where you're going. So even though I put some numbers on here and they vaguely do represent, it's not meant to be every place in Europe is 48 hours or, but 24, 48, 72, and 96 hours are very common numbers you're going to see in terms of the testing period that you need to test within. Even some people, including the US, say a calendar day. And the reason that is of course, when there's time zone changes and stuff, we do have to keep that in mind. So you have to calculate out quite correctly to make sure your test result is within. Now, maybe some of this sounds daunting. And again, I don't want us to be the end all answer, because we will talk you through these things, but this is what we do every day. It is second nature to us to be talking about 48 hours and things like that. However, saying that, I do want to clarify why I say some of this is nebulous, because there's kind of two things in this in this verbiage, if you will. 72 hours or whatever the time period is, and then the description of when that 72 hours has to be valid. So for example, a destination might say, I want to see a negative PCR test within 72 hours of departure. That's a very common line that we see. And if you search up destinations, you will see that X number of hours within departure. So 72 hours, 48 hours is obviously the first key point. But within departure is kind of where some of the nebulous stuff comes in. Is that when you leave your home airport, your first flight? What if you have two connecting flights? What if you have a long layover or whatever? So I will tell you that talking to the tourism board or the airline may help get a very concrete answer to that. But what we have been tending to do is calculate out that testing period on your last flight into the country. So if I'm flying to Dubai next week and I'm going through Amsterdam and then on to Dubai, I'm going to calculate my 72 hours from my Amsterdam departure time. That way I know I'm covered, even if it's Minneapolis, because that is kind of the strictest time period possible. So these are the discussions we would have with you and help you, figure out when does that need to be. Obviously 72 hours is 3 days. So if I have a 9 p.m. flight, it means I would have to fly or test 3 days, 9 p.m. before that. So we would just talk you through this. So again, it might seem daunting, but it's really part of day-to-day conversation now with us. So we do help clarify that, and we help you take into time zone changes and things like that. So for example, if you're flying to Buenos Aires from Minneapolis and you're going through Miami, I would calculate the 72 hours based on that Miami flight. So again, just collaboration and, putting our heads together and helping to navigate that part of testing. And like I said, make sure you take time zones into consideration. Jim and I went to Egypt right before the holidays, and we had to calculate in a 6 or 7 hour time difference. Not a big deal. So we just took that into effect. And then the other key thing on this point is, when does the clock start ticking? It starts ticking when you get the test taken, not when you get the test result back, not because you're going to have a timestamp on your lab result. And it's going to say that I tested at 4 p.m. So it has to be, we have to time up the test, right? Not just when you're going to get the results. So where do these magical tests happen? And several of you asked about this. Where do I test to go? Where do I test to come home? Where do I test, period? And of course, there's a million answers to this. But again, from a travel perspective, we are kind of always trying to identify places that are traveler friendly because it's time sensitive. We don't want to be stressed out waiting for a test result to come back and our flight departs in 2 hours and we're hoping to God it comes, right? So obviously you can check with your doctor's office or your pharmacy or wherever you may have had testing done before or in your community. Again, I would just say, make sure you're asking the right questions. How do they turn around their lab results? Is it within the time period you want? Because not all of them are set up. And unfortunately, with the situation with the new variant, there has been a run on testing, if you will. So just make sure you're asking those questions, because several of them can still easily deliver it. Just others aren't equipped or expected because they're doing it for regular people in their everyday lives, not necessarily somebody who is urgently, like, has a deadline that they need to get that test result. The other thing is so of course your pharmacy and stuff is an option. Just make sure you're asking those right questions. But on the right, the picture on the right is to remind you if you don't know and let you know that many airports now have testing centers right on property, and they offer a range of tests. So and this is everywhere. I'll talk about Minneapolis because many of us are in Minneapolis, but JFK, LAX, Miami, a lot of the big airports have testing centers right within their terminals. So that makes me feel good because I know they know we're time sensitive. So many of them, you can see if you look online, they say within an hour. They'll say within 3 to 5 hours. So again, you can time it to either just go early to your flight, sit in the lounge after that, or I have a lot of clients who go the day before. If you're close enough to the airport, they go the day before, and then it's well within the 48 or 72 hours. You get the result back in time. They're very equipped to turn it. They lab it right there. They know you're time sensitive. So that is usually a very good option. And I'll talk about Minneapolis in a minute. On the left-hand side, for those of you who are in the Minneapolis area, and for those of you who aren't, I know we have some Montana and some New York and some other places on here tonight. I'm quite confident that you have the equivalent of these in your market. But these are two in the Minneapolis area that can turn their results around in 24 hours. And that's kind of a magic number because, again, if you're being asked to test 48 or 72 hours beforehand and you're calculating out from your last flight into the destination, 24 hours is a really great number because then you know you're safe. You're still probably getting it in time to not have a heart attack waiting. So those are a couple good ones. Oral DNA Labs happens to be in Eden Prairie. I'm actually going to test them, if you will. I'm going to test them, test me on Tuesday because I do go to Dubai next week actually, and they are to turn their results in 24 hours. So I'm going to see how they do and hope that I get a negative test in 24 hours. And then I'm going to tell you about my backup plan in a second. The other is Valley Medical. They have locations in Burnsville and Woodbury. Again, they are 24-hour results. So far, of course, I don't want to say guaranteed because I can't guarantee it because the moment I do, they'll have a run and they won't be able to deliver it. But so far, I say this with confidence because some of our team has used them and a lot of our clients have used them and have consistently gotten good results within 24 hours. So I would encourage you to consider them as a possible alternative. Now, from our standpoint in MSP, some of you maybe have heard about Wander Test. So for those of you who are here, I can vouch that that is a super slick, great option. Jim and I did use it to go into Egypt, and they do a PCR test, which is 99% of the time when you're going somewhere what you need, and is what we usually recommend just because we know it makes the grade with all destinations. So if you do Wander Test, you can choose the PCR test, and the results came for us. They came in 35 minutes. They say they will deliver them within an hour. So in my case, what I did is I set up an oral DNA for 24 hours in advance. And then I set up a Wander Test as my backup option for 4 hours before my flight so that I still had time, knowing that I felt very comfortable. The difference is Wander Test does cost $199 for a PCR. So it's not cheap. A lot of it is you're paying for peace of mind because it is quick and very reliable. But the nice thing about the two on the left is they are covered by insurance. So technically they could be somewhat free to you. So keep that in mind. There's nuances, but these are great options for you if you are a traveler in the Minneapolis market. And like I said, if you're in other markets, I know that of course the world is testing right now. So there are good options where you are as well. How do you test to get home? Of course, another big question. Ironically, this little clip, you can see January 2021, a year ago. We had this in our travel night last January when it first got announced that the US was going to mandate entry. Any international travelers coming in would have to show a test, and anyone returning to the US from an international trip would have to test. So a little irony for you there. But again, it's interesting because our protocols say no more than 1 day before you travel to the US. So let's call it 24 hours and use a calculation that we can kind of equate to. But of course, this still applies. We are still needing to test to get back. So how do you test to get back in? Many hotels will do it right on property. We help a lot of our clients do that. The Lundbergs who are on the call tonight leave and go to Paris and the Maldives. And Emily and I helped them identify local pharmacies and what the concierge at those hotels offered for their testing. So we had choices and they could make decisions and things. This is very common for us. We often line them up for our clients or guide you on who to email to make an appointment. Quite simple and very quite reliable because again, the hotels and these pharmacies near hotels are very versed in knowing travelers need to get it, and the US demands it within 24 hours. So again, pretty reliable if you're asking the right questions and making sure you're setting up the appointment at the right time. The other thing, the little inset shot there, for those of you who are not familiar, Binax Now is a brand the brand name of a testing at home self-test kit that can be used for travel. It has to be the one that is supported by telehealth services. So basically what that means is you go online, you just need Wi-Fi, you go online and you get a medical professional to proctor your testing. So you don't open the box until they see you open the box, and then they walk you through the process. They see that it's you and they wait the 15 minutes with you, and then you get a formal lab result. eMed is their lab. So this is a very easy way. A lot of our clients use this as their way to get home. It is an accepted way to get home as long as you do it proctored through the telehealth thing. So again, something really pretty simple. I usually, what we've started to do is we carry a couple with us. And then if we feel like we want to use it as a backup option, fine, or we can use it as our go-to option because we know it's accepted as long as we do it correctly. Just to be clear, it cannot be a regular at-home rapid test because Binax does have a version that's just the really quick, like this pregnancy type looking result, and it can't be that. It has to be the proctored by a medical professional, which again may sound more than it is in my mind. So keep that in mind because it's something that you could travel with them and have them as your go-to or a backup. And then you can do it yourself in your hotel room and calculate it out to just be 24 hours before you're going to depart.
Linda, do you want to mention cruise lines too?
What about them, Liz? I am mentioning them later, but is there something specific about the testing that with the Binax?
Not Binax, but when you're needing to test to get home, the cruise lines are offering those tests on the ship to make it really easy for you. Most of the cruise lines are also doing it free of charge. Some are charging a nominal fee, but regardless, they're making it really easy for everybody.
Perfect. Thank you. You can tell Liz gets a little sensitive if I forget cruises, which I usually try so hard not to because I have a whole section on it, Liz, coming up. But very good point because we talk about hotels. If it's easy for them, we know the cruise lines are going to do it. They're the most strictly enforced, which we'll talk about the good and the bad with that. Okay, so are there other requirements? So we talked about by destination, do you have to be vaccinated? How old does the vaccination have to be, or how new, if you will? What testing? How soon do you have to test to travel, and what kind of test, and all that kind of stuff, right? So what other requirements are there? Usually not much. Those, of course, are the two big discussion points. But again, very specific to the destination. And frankly, it depends if you're just transiting through. Like I'm flying through Amsterdam on the way to Dubai, not much I need to do. If I were to leave the airport, as some clients on here know, if they're getting out of the airport in Paris and they're going to stay overnight, it's going to trip you up and you may have to test again. So take your Binax or whatever the case is. In my case, the right-hand side is the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands. I will need to fill out a health declaration. It's literally 3 questions that says, do you have any symptoms? And I swear that I'm being truthful, that I'm not sick, and whatever. Super easy. I know some of you on here have trips to Mexico coming up. They do ask you to register and fill out a health declaration as well. Most of these things are online and like 4 questions and very easy. But just know that, again, we'll let you know, or you'll read if you go to the tourism authority sites or to the CDC, it tells you right on there, you need to fill out this health declaration. Very simple. And others may just do a safe traveler program or something like that, where it might even be optional. Some would really like you to do it, but it might just be registering yourself so that if they are doing contact tracing or other things, again, online, super quick and easy, and quite simple. Clearly, vaccination and testing are the biggest discussions we would have, but I just wanted to throw this in there because there are places that, you know, do require a little 4 question questionnaire. What can I do and how do I prepare for travel? I mentioned Jim and I were in Egypt, so I thought I'd just throw that up because we just went through this in preparing for our travels, and I'm in the midst of it as well. So a couple of these things might sound a little obvious, and I promise not to be preachy on it, but some people don't think of all of these things, and we live and breathe this, so it seems second nature to us, but I'm going to say them anyway. Please take precautions the week or so before you're going to travel. Don't go to a concert and hug strangers for extended periods of time without a mask on, or other things that would put you at risk for catching the virus. If you're going to travel, please just be vigilant. Obviously, you're going to live your life and you're going to do everything, and that's your call. But if you're going to travel, that negative PCR test is going to be what's going to allow you to travel, and you need to be able to test negative, right? So just, you know, watch yourself the maybe week or so before you're going to travel. I've said it before, but collaborate with your travel designer on what is that country's protocols? What are their testing requirements? What forms need to be filled out? Because a lot of this stuff is going to be done well in advance. And if you know you want to go to Croatia in June, and your vaccine, you got your last vaccine in May, well, now we can help prepare you. That says they want to see a booster within 365 days, which as of today, you don't qualify for. So it gives you plenty of time to go get your booster if that's what you choose to do. Or we have to pick a different destination than Croatia. So again, these preparations, very much part of our day-to-day discussion. So they would be uncovered and talked about, and really most of them quite easily addressed. Obviously, we're going to ask you to be diligent about any health protocols. If you've traveled, you know the airlines and the airports are requiring masks. If you go to a hotel, they may have, you know, certain things. Again, kind of nothing that we're not getting used to every day here. But of course, for yours and everyone else's safety. And then in preparation, buy some Binax tests, have them on hand if that is a path that you're interested in pursuing, just have them on hand. Those happen to come in a 6-pack. So if there's 2 of you, you could take 2 each and you'd still have some. But again, make sure they're the ones that are the eMed and telehealth so that you have the correct ones with you. Again, these are day-to-day conversations for us. So not too daunting, but part of our little checklist that we would help you to prepare for travel. Okay, got to address the elephant in the room, right? Because what if you do get sick while you're traveling? And unfortunately for tonight's topic, I don't mean the flu, I mean COVID. So what if you do test positive? You will be asked to quarantine, of course. And again, broken record, it depends on the destination. Some are as little as 5 days, some might be as many as 10. Many are in that 5 to 7 day range, with the ability to test 3 days after, 2 or 3 days after you have that first negative or that first positive test in this case. So for example, we did have some clients who tested positive and were thinking they were not going to be able to get home. 2 days later, were able to test again. It turned out to be a false positive, or they were just miraculously healed and they tested negative and were able to come home. So again, we'll walk you through that. And I am going to share some things about, kind of protecting yourself and preparing for this situation. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But know that if you do have to quarantine, again, we're kind of by your side. We have probably asked or know the places in your area that you would be able to quarantine. Many places have approved hotels or facilities. In many cases, your hotel is probably approved. Maybe you have to move to a different wing or to a different floor or something. But I always say, let's try to get you a balcony so you get some fresh air, and let's have a dang good restaurant, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to sit in your room and you're going to be able to eat, but you are, again, not going to be hanging out at the pool. You will have to quarantine on property until you can test again. And like I said, maybe it's 3 days later, or until you reach the quarantine time period, which in some cases is 5 days. So keep those in mind, because if you do test positive while you're there, you will quarantine. Just like if you test on the way out, clearly we will address that and you would not be able to go. Which leads me to this slide. A lot of people ask about insurance. And some people say, I don't really believe in insurance. I'm kind of a skeptic about it. I feel like there's a lot of fine print and I don't understand it. And I feel like anything I would say, they would say, oh, that's not claimable. But should you? And I recently have been telling a lot of my clients, I can't make you take out insurance, but I can sure beg you to take out insurance. And it really has come to that point, because it only takes one time for us to have to call you and tell you that because you didn't take out insurance, the cost of your trip. I mean, I don't care if that's $1,500 or it's $25,000. You're out that money, right? So protecting that investment, especially during these times of COVID, when there's a lot more wild cards on the table, is really a critical piece to every discussion we have. And we will ask you, if you say no the first time, just know we will ask you probably again, and maybe even 3 times, just because we have to make sure we're doing our job too, to give you all the options that you can. By the way, this is an Explora lodge in Patagonia, just for those of you who are paying attention to the inspirational subliminal photography, or maybe not so subliminal. Okay, so of course, what does travel insurance cover? And trust me, we could get into the weeds on this. So I'm going to just try to give you a few examples that would likely be reasons a policy would cover you. Okay, we can never make a guarantee, but in our experience, we kind of know many of the reasons that would be claimable. So if you do test positive on your way out, you have to go in 72 hours before you get your test results, you're positive. You would be eligible to get everything back, or at least claim it and likely get reimbursed. Again, in our experience, the odds are extremely, extremely high. I will not say 100%, but very likely. So again, if you have insurance, because at that point, it's a medical condition, you're sick, they don't care that it's COVID, it would be coverable. That's for you. And if your immediate family members, or so kids, or your mom or dad, or your spouse, or even if they're not traveling with you, if they get COVID and you have to stay behind to care for them, that is a claimable reason. If you get sick or test positive for COVID while you're traveling, so let's say 3 days before you're feeling symptoms, so you're like, maybe I'll test, and then you have to miss 2 days of touring or a guided walk or some kind of a zip line or something like that. There are line items on the policy for trip interruption and trip delay that will kick in and help you offset some or most of that cost. And then, of course, if you do get sick, heaven forbid, knock on lots of wood at Pique that we have not had this happen yet, but if you are sick and require a hospital stay, it is it's covered just as a regular medical condition, again, would be. So the medical insurance, medical coverage line item of that policy of just the basic or our select policy would cover you. And just so you know, a couple people did ask very specific questions about this, and we're happy to answer them to the best of our ability. We are not, of course, just as we're not medical professionals, we're not licensed travel insurance sellers. However, we will guide you to the best of our knowledge. And then we have an amazing customer support line that can really get into the weeds and stuff like that for you. But I will address a couple questions that very specifically came up. In specific, someone was asking about medical insurance versus travel insurance. So for example, should they be taking out medical insurance because they think of travel insurance for like if they have to cancel or if your bags get lost along the way or something like that. For all, at least we have several preferred partners that we work with. Every single one of our partners has a line item on a regular policy that we would purchase for you that has medical coverage on it. So you would be covered. So if you did land in the hospital for a broken leg, for example, and you needed to get it addressed while you're in Italy, that would be a medical condition. Your medical line item, your medical coverage would cover that. Same thing if you test positive and you need to go into the hospital to get checked or whatever, your medical coverage line item covers that. It also covers medical evacuation, which we'll talk a little bit about. But if by chance you need to get evacuated out, I've actually had clients a few years ago that, of course, before COVID, but he got very sick in Italy and got the flu, but it turned into a really bad situation and we had to evacuate him out. So you should not have to buy any extra medical coverage, if you will, in terms of insurance, because anything we would guide you on would have a pretty significant line item to address that. And then another thing I'll point out is many people don't realize that their US, like if you have health partners or you have Aon or any of these other Blue Cross Blue Shield or anything, a lot of US healthcare policies do not cover you when you are traveling internationally. So I would just urge you to find out if they do or what is covered, because travel insurance policies do have medical coverage. So we can, explain that to you. It's very clear when we give you a quote or an example that it's broken out as a line item there. So just please keep that in mind. And those are some of the things that are covered, and a million other things, of course. So what does it not cover, which maybe is more an important question. So again, if you take out a general travel insurance policy with us, there are several examples, but I'll give you a few of the most common ones that you might think are covered and they are not. So if it's getting closer to travel and you have a fear of going, like you're like, oh my gosh, I might get COVID if I go there. Unfortunately, that is not covered. Fear of contracting COVID is not a covered reason. If the country locks down or tightens up its travel bans, ironically, a pandemic is not covered. So we're going to talk about solutions that do get you coverage for these things, just so you know. So don't get disheartened, because there are options. It's just not in the basic, in the general policy that we would be selling you. And then canceling, like if you were going to Hawaii for a conference and your spouse was coming along, and then you extended for 3 days, and 2 months before they decided to cancel the conference, you could not cancel your trip just because of that reason. A current event or a scheduled event or a concert or a conference or things like that you might travel for would not be covered. But let's talk about some incremental things that you can consider that do cover you for those things. Because we don't mean to be doldrummy here. You have options. We just want you to know that you have other protections that you need to know about. One of them, and many of you have maybe heard about this, but it is considered a cancel for any reason. And it's an upgrade to a standard travel insurance policy. So basically, we would take out a regular insurance policy. It would have that medical coverage, trip interruption, trip delay, baggage delay, all the things that you know and love about travel insurance. And no matter what happens, those are still 100% claimable if you end up canceling for one of those reasons that we talked about. What cancel for any reason provides you is maybe a little bit for those of us who are control freaks or want flexibility in our decision making, and want to cancel because I want to cancel and I don't feel comfortable, or on a whim, I am looking for, if the travel ban or the cases go up, that I could cancel for any reason. It literally is any reason. You do not have to give a reason. So if you don't like what you're seeing out there and you're going to Greece and their cases went up or whatever, it's ultimately the decision is yours in the end. So this could be a thing to consider. Basically, it is an upgrade to the policy. It's literally a box we check. There's a premium you pay. Some clients say, could I get the quote based on just the regular policy? And then what would it be to upgrade to add cancel for any reason? Now, again, I'm going to urge you to talk to your travel designer about this because there are a fair number of nuances with this. Like I said, the base policy is still the same. If you cancel for any, claimable, like what we discussed as some covered reasons, it's 100% covered. That doesn't affect it. That's still intact. However, if you do cancel for any reason, as we said, you're eligible for up to 50% of that trip cost. So on one hand, the good news is you're eligible for 50% if you just say, I don't feel good about going, because otherwise you would have lost 100% of that investment. So for some people, having the option to at least know 50% of their investment is secured is really what they need, because hopefully you won't get to that point. But hey, who's talking? We didn't know half of this stuff was going to happen. So you don't know, you can't predict, right? So many people like that little extra protection because they know that they call the shot then. If they're not comfortable, they're at least going to probably be eligible for up to 50%. And then, like I said, if they cancel for a regular reason that would have been part of it anyway, they're still eligible for that 100% of the other things. So you might feel like it's way better than nothing because all decision-making power is removed from you if you don't get it. Some people are totally comfortable with that. It does come with a premium, but like I said, we can easily quote it both ways. And then just so you know, again, like little nuances, like we do have to purchase it within a certain amount of time throughout the trip planning process. So if we know you're interested in that, we can explain that as we go along. We usually talk about it as one of the options. Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, another protection, and some of you have heard about this. Many of you might already have it, and if you do, I'm thrilled to hear it. If not, you may want to consider it. But if you've heard of MedJet Assist, it is not insurance, and it is not intended to be in lieu of insurance. They do two totally different things. This rather is a membership where basically you can be medically transported home if you are hospitalized while you're traveling. So whether it's COVID or you, like I used an example of a client who had to get, it was a little bit of a different situation, but this would have applied to them. You get to decide, you get the choice if you want to fly home. If the doctor says that you are stable and everything is fine, like if you have COVID and you're hospitalized and they're monitoring you, but you want to get the heck out of there, you would be able to make that decision as long as the doctor says, yes, you're stable and fine to travel. Now, it is a private vehicle, private, I don't want to say jet because it sounds like you're going to have a flight attendant serving you champagne. It is a medically equipped private jet. It's not sexy, it's not pretty, but it gets you home right away at your discretion, as long as the doctor says it's okay. So the ideal situation would be you would take out insurance because that covers your medical. So if you do go into the hospital for a broken leg, let's say, or for a whatever, um, I'll say COVID, even though I don't want to think about that. That covers your medical bills, right? That line item that says medical coverage, that's going to cover the doctor helping you, any testing, any medication, whatever. MedJet is solely to evacuate you out of there. So that's why I say it is not in lieu of each other. They kind of work together. One does one thing and the other picks it up. So just keep that in mind. And the nice thing about MedJet is there's no cap on the expense. So it doesn't matter if you're in Egypt or you're in the Caribbean, as long as you're 150 miles or more away from home, you could be in California. And if you live in Minneapolis, it would qualify. So just know that that's a really kind of good option to think. My family has a family membership. Honestly, it's like $200 or $300 for a year. So I feel for peace of mind, that if we were ever in a situation, that's a pretty small investment to kind of buy that peace of mind and know I had a few more options in addition to the insurance that we buy each time. So keep it in mind. I'll in my follow-up email, I'll try to send you a link so that you could read more about it, and we can of course help you as needed, but I'll include a link to that. Okay, so sorry, I'm dumping a lot of things. So hopefully you're typing in the chat because I'm not monitoring it, and I know Aaron will. We're almost to the end, so we'll weigh in on some of those. So as a homage to Liz, should I consider a cruise? Is it safe? I love cruises too. Aaron, Chris, Liz, and I, we all book cruises, but Liz is the cruise master, as you probably know if you've worked with her. And you've heard us talk about cruises on past travel nights and stuff. We're a big fan, especially of small to mid-sized ships and expedition. We love expedition. Not the big 3,000, 4,000 people ship, maybe not that, but we love the 100 to 600 where it's a small, more intimate, totally different experience. We love it. But of course, again, it's a personal decision. There's a lot of news out there about cruises, and we'll talk about that. But if you're a cruiser, you probably know they already were doing really good protocols, and they are very safe, especially if you look at some of what hotels are doing or other things. Cruises have a very high standard. Hotels and airlines have totally revamped how they're doing it too. So it's quite a good environment out there. But for sake of talking about cruises, I wanted to call out a couple things. It's kind of ironic because I feel, and Liz and I talk about this often, the cruise industry segment of the travel industry has really bore the brunt of the bad press. They get the bad rap. And a lot of it is because by law, they have to report their cases. Delta Airlines doesn't have to report their cases. The Ritz-Carlton doesn't have to report their cases. So we don't know what's going on in those environments. We would hear it. So we don't think it's a ton because we know that the studies on the airlines show it's a tiny percent of people. So I don't want to bag on them because we need them in the equation too, right? They are doing great protocols, but the poor cruise industry has really gotten the brunt of a lot of it because they have to report their numbers. So it hits the press, right? But I will tell you that if you looked at the cruises that have sailed since July of last year, they have only had a 0.02 positivity rate since then. Just to give you context, the state of Georgia earlier this month reported almost 39%. So if you want to go to the grocery store, you might be more risky than getting on a cruise because of the safety measures. And a lot of it is because you have to be vaccinated. And as Liz said, they test. So they are doing a lot of things to keep that positivity rate low on their ships. They don't want it either, and they don't want you to get it. So just know, I wanted to throw that out there because we do have a lot of repeat cruisers. And I will say cruises booking up fast, and we're not just saying that. We've had to look out 1 or 2 already years to be able to get some people on the cruise that they want in the Galapagos or in some of these specialty markets. So please keep that in mind. Okay, one last thing. When? should you start planning? Of course, I'm going to say as soon as possible, and the earlier the better, but it is very true. And I just use the cruise example. You know, when you have boutique hotels or you have a expedition ship, they have low quantity numbers to start with. And it's not just US wanting to travel, the world is traveling and has been waiting to travel, and it frankly is traveling. So you really can't be too early. We will help guide that discussion, but availability is tight, and I'm not just saying it. I mentioned um, earlier that people have their sights already set on, you know, a lot this summer. We're super busy and have so many trips booked from May to the end of the year. We have a lot now. Poor Aaron is shouldering a lot of our February and March warm weather getaways, and then Europe and Africa and a lot of places kick in. So summer and fall is already super busy. And I will say, we are compressing travel. We are still replanning, maybe for the third time, trips that were scheduled in 2020. And then they went to 2021. And now they're into 2022. And you pair that with all the people who have been pent up and are ready to get out of there, understand their vaccination is in good order, and they're totally willing to test as if that's the price of entry, no big deal. So please know that the combination of trips that were bumped and everybody ready to go or starting to feel much more comfortable, especially after we get out of this peak. It's kind of why I say May through the end of the year is we've seen, you know, these peaks and valleys, and we know that often by spring the cases are coming back down and people are back outside, or the lifestyles are changing. So please know that if you do hope to travel this year or even into next, that it is not too early to start planning. And we will often say we're going to plan it as if the guidelines are today, because I don't think by November that people are going to take away testing, or they're going to take away the need to show a vaccination card of some sort or within a certain time period. If anything, it'll lighten up a little bit and it'll be a bonus for us. But we will probably advise you to plan it as according to what it looks like today. So plan ahead. Hopefully we gave you some tools tonight to be smart, to be thoughtful, to protect yourself, but to get out and enjoy the beauty that this world has waited for us to come back to. A lot of you have maybe been out there already, but I know a lot of people are just so eager and ready. All right, what do we got? Some chats going on. And please use it or unmute yourself and weigh in with a question. Erin, what do you got?
I have two questions here. The first one I was going to ask is, someone said, if I recently had COVID but have recovered, could you talk about my options for coming home?
Yes. And not only your options for coming home, but your options for going too. Okay. So depending on when you had COVID may, you know, flex this discussion a little bit with your advisor. Because if you had COVID within the last 90 days, particularly 14 to 90 days, you are in that recovery zone, if you will. So some countries, even to go in and the US to come back, you can get a recovery certificate. As long as, again, 14 to 90 days is the big. If you had it on Friday and you're leaving this Friday, you better hope for a negative test, because a recovery certificate would not be applicable to you. Okay. So recovery certificate, meaning get a note from your doctor that says you are cleared, you did your quarantine, you are recovered, and you are cleared to travel. And that can kind of serve as your, you know, pass quite a bit. The reason I say on the way out too is because, unfortunately, for people who have had it within the 90 days, it's not common, but it is possible that even though you're recovered, you might test positive. So that's why I say, if you had it 14 to 90 days and you have a trip coming up in March and you just had it, which means you'd fall in that period of time, go get a positive PCR test. That's what you'll need to show. That's your certificate of recovery. And then you'll have a doctor write a letter on letterhead that says you've passed the time period, you've recovered, and I clear them to travel. And that will count in some places. And again, we'll advise you. Like I have guys in Iceland right now, and that would have worked. One of my guys just recovered 3 weeks ago from Iceland. We were preparing his certificate of recovery and the doctor note. He ended up testing negative, but we were prepared that if he tested positive, this would allow him into Iceland because it shows that he has recovered. So I hope that kind of answers some of that. And it definitely can be used to come back in as well. So it depends on the going out, where you're going, and you can use that as your entry back in case you would happen to test positive. It's kind of the counter to a positive test because it's just residual. You have recovered. So keep that in mind.
And then the other question that I can also answer if you'd like was about the eMed Binax tests and how long they are valid or what the expiration is. And the answer is, I think that the US just extended how long they are good. If you are ordering from emed.com, which as far as I know is the only place to order the ones that have the telehealth element to them, it will tell you if there is an expiration date that might be of issue. For a while, they were only valid through February, the ones that they had in stock, but they have fixed that. So the answer is if you're buying from eMed, they should alert you if they're going to expire in the meantime. Otherwise, if you're using it anytime in the next 6 to 12 months, they should be okay.
Yep. Good point. And also I will say that, again, because there's so many cases right now, there was a run on tests. I just ordered some for my Dubai trip and I got them within 3 days, but you will want to watch it. So you don't want to get them like 2 years in advance because clearly they're going to expire. So watch that expiration date, but also give yourself time to get them because we have heard from clients in the past that they were on back order or whatever. Right now, that's not the case, but it ebbs and flows. So kind of strike that happy medium if you can.
I think that was it. Frank asked about countries that are completely shut down. And Liz chimed in with Australia. Most of Asia is still fairly locked down, but.
Yep. New Zealand and Australia, hopefully soon. Asia is a little behind. But if you haven't done Wanderlist or you have, this is exactly what this tool was meant to do, right? If you had Vietnam or maybe that's not a great example, but if you had one of those Asian countries, China right now, even with the Olympics, you can't go. So we would rearrange because there are plenty of ones that are open and are safe. In fact, their counts are way lower than ours right now. I was in Egypt. I'd rather be in Egypt than I was in Egypt for 10 days, was on 4 planes, thousands of miles, tested 3 times, no issue. Came home, drove 20 minutes to Lake Minnetonka to my family's Christmas celebration and got exposed. Luckily never got COVID, but it's just such a variable right now. But yeah, we'll help walk you through or maybe rearrange the order of trips if you want to. And if you haven't done Wanderlist, it's a good time to do it so that we make up for lost time and kind of methodically plot out what makes sense this year versus next or whatever.
And then Frank also asked, what's our philosophy on planning future travel to places that are completely shut down? Do we wait or do we start right now?
We are waiting for now for the most part. As we are monitoring it and as we know things change or we have a lot of insider, luckily insider access in the industry, and we usually kind of can feel and know what's going on. But like even Chris would tell you with New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah, let me jump in quick, Linda, and I'll talk Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah.
So Australia and New Zealand are both currently locked down to US travelers. Up until the new variant kind of broke out, they were originally planning on opening in phases starting yesterday. So the good news is that they were at the beginning stages of reopening. If you've seen in the news, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore have a little triangular travel bubble going, and that's the first stage. The reason why they're locked down is that they want to protect the government facilities as well as hospitals to make sure that they don't get overrun, because countries like New Zealand don't have a major healthcare. And if you have travelers coming in, and again, there's only 6 million people that live in New Zealand, so that can get overrun pretty quickly. My best guess is they're going to push that to the middle of February to start that process. And then again, looking at later this year, probably third quarter, fourth quarter for US travelers to be able to start traveling. Again, for both countries, tourism is the number one kind of monetary that comes in. So it is a big piece of the puzzle. And again, they've gone through almost 3 full peak seasons without having any tourism. So we're almost there to the point where it'll start going. I have started booking people for 2023, and I feel pretty confident about both those destinations as being viable for next year. Again, if you wanted to try and book for 2022, I would be a little bit hesitant just because I know that it might not happen. But at the same time, a lot of these places aren't requiring much of a deposit. So it might be in your best interest to look at an itinerary, get some good terms and conditions in terms of hotels or tours or whatnot that don't offer or don't require a lot of money down, and the cancellation terms are pretty good, and we can help you out with that. And it protects you because again, like Linda mentioned, there's a lot of pent-up demand for a lot of these countries and a lot of delayed bookings. So if you do have it high on your list, I would suggest looking sooner rather than later, especially for 2023.
I would say too, like I do a lot of our Southeast Asia, and I do have honeymooners interested in going this summer yet. And I've basically said, let's have general conversations, because with a lot of the places they're looking at, there's still not really a sign of life, where Australia, New Zealand, we're starting to see maybe a little bit on the glimmer. We're very busy right now, which is great, but we're also protective of your time and our time. So we want to make sure that we feel like this will be feasible. So if you're planning a year out, I think we're all probably hopeful that we should be talking about that. If it's in a more immediate kind of time frame and they're not open yet, we may keep that to a more general conversation and then be ready as soon as things are starting to feel better. Then we'll reach out and start having those conversations.
And to that point too, and it is another time where travel insurance comes up, because if we do the right things up front, we have tricks too, where like if that trip moves, we can reassign, we can bump the travel policy, the insurance policy. So you don't lose that policy or anything. It can move with you. It doesn't even have to go to the same destination. It can just go to your next trip. So there's a lot of things up front that if we're smart, we plan ahead, we can put a lot of protections and make sure we're getting the best terms and conditions for you. And planning ahead allows us to do a lot of those things. Now, clearly there's a lot of last minute travel too. We get a lot of, 60 to 90 days. And we just may be a little bit more, within the standard terms and conditions that may not be as flexible as when we're planning in advance. So just know that, and we'll guide you, and we'll be very honest and sensible about what makes the most sense for you, depending on where we're talking. We also know which destinations have been kind of steady eddies. Croatia, Greece, there's a few others that we know they've been very good about their protocols. They haven't been yo-yoing around about their testing or vaccine or whatever. So we feel better about, we know they've got it. And we know that when something happens, or if something happens, that how they kind of ebb and flow. So we can also make those types of suggestions to you depending on where you're looking to go. All right, anybody else want to type something in the chat, or do you feel like, I hope this was helpful to you? Obviously, reach out to, if you've worked with a designer here before. Otherwise, you can, of course, always email me at Jim. But I hope you found this helpful. and maybe some of the photography inspiring, and know that it's very possible, depending on your personal situations, to continue to get out there. And let us know. Give us a shout, or let us know what we can talk with you about. All right, everybody. On that note, I bid you farewell. Thank you.